Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we will have Joseph Cirincioni, or Cirincioni. I knew I was going to butcher his name, but he's a Senior Vice President for National Security and International Policy at the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C., and recently he authored a book. The title of that book is Bomb Scare: The History and Future of Nuclear Weapons. We will be speaking with him about nuclear weapons and nuclear bombs, etc., where this world is going as far as nuclear bombs and nuclear energy. In the second hour, ladies and gentlemen, we will have a doctor. She is Dalia Wasfi, MD. She's of Iraqi descent. Her mother is Jewish and her father is Iraqi. And she was recently on Capitol Hill testifying in front of Congress. So we will find out what Dr. Dalia Wasfi is all about, and what does she want, what did she say to Congress, and what is she trying to accomplish. Before we go to our guest, ladies and gentlemen, George Tenet recently, actually it was yesterday, that he published his book. It came out yesterday, April 30th. And in that book, he's trying to put the blame on somebody else, as the blame game already started, so he wants to jump in. In my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, it's a bunch of BS. Now, George Tenet is saying he wrote the book because of his phrase, slam dunk. Now, Vice President Cheney and others have used that to tell us that it was George Tenet who said it was a slam dunk, proving that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. That's how they sold it to us at the time. You do remember Vice President Cheney when he mentioned that on TV, as a matter of fact, all over, and radio, and print, and not just Dick Cheney, but everybody else, said that the intelligence we have is, and our Director of Intelligence saying it's a slam dunk of finding weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Now, he is saying that's not what he said. The slam dunk phrase was in response to President Bush actually asking him if it would be, not asking him, they were in the Oval Office and they were just talking about it, and the president said, can we sell this thing to the people, the weapons of mass destruction, and would be a reason to go to war against Iraq. And that's when he said slam dunk. He was referring that we will be able, that they will be able to convince the American people to support the war against Saddam Hussein and against the country of Iraq. To me, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know which one is worse. Both of them are worse. And to me, what George Tenet is trying to do, he's trying to say that he said it was slam dunk, that we will convince the people to support the war against Iraq, even though it was a lie. So either way you look at it, if it was the slam dunk that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, that's a lie. And if you look at it as he was saying it was a slam dunk that we will convince the American people, that's even worse. When in the world was the CIA responsible for promoting and marketing a war to the American people? So either way, he knew there was no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and he wanted to sell this. So regardless of what he says, it's wrong. Now, this Kiss and Tell book that he came out with, and as you know, he had been given the the Medal of Freedom by the president. He accepted it. And as you know, he was sitting behind Colin Powell at the United Nations Security Council meeting when they discussed this, and when Colin Powell was showing these pictures of the fake, supposedly Iraqi mobile unit weapons of mass destruction, biological, chemical, mobile units. As you know, those were fake, but he was sitting right behind him. So he knew what they were trying to sell to the world was wrong. It was a lie, but he continued to be there. And he accepted the Medal of Freedom from the president. If he would have just stood up that day when he was behind Colin Powell and spared him and Colin Powell, who's still agonizing over that episode, if he would have said, Mr. Secretary, may I have the microphone for a second, and told the world that this is all garbage, this is not true, it is fake, there's no weapons of mass destruction, we could have saved about 1 million people. We could have saved our country the misery that we have been going through since 2001, mainly from 2003 when we went and attacked Iraq. We could have spared our people the 3,000 and more. We lost 100 people last month, ladies and gentlemen. 100 Americans died in Iraq last month. It was the highest in 2007. He could have spared the country a lot if he would have exposed these people at the time instead of exposing them now. They've already been exposed, George. You're too late. You are a little bit too late. I'm going to go to the phones and, for a second, and then we'll come back to our guest. Go ahead, Freedom.
Dr. Tillawi, I'm glad you brought up the point that George Tenet said slam dunk in a totally different way than Dick Cheney and Condoleezza Rice had, because of the fact when he was in the Oval Office with George Bush, when the thing came out about the yellow cake uranium,
right,
that's when he said slam dunk, because we had the weapons of mass destruction in chemical weapons. You know what I mean? But that wouldn't have been enough to go to war.
Yeah. Well, where that came from, where that phrase, where that phrase came from.
It came up about, about the yellow cake uranium.
Well,
that was the slam dunk, the nuclear weapon.
Not really. It came out in a conversation in the Oval Office. Cheney and others saying that it was in response to the president saying, can we find the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? And Cheney and them saying that he said it's slam dunk of finding those weapons of mass destruction, but he's saying no. He's saying the president was saying, can we sell this to the country, to the people in America? And he's saying that he said it was slam dunk at that time, that can we sell the war to them? He was not saying slam dunk that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
That's his explanation. But that's even worse. That's even worse. That means...
That's what I'm telling you now. The reason they could have sold the war now is because they brought in the nuclear component, which caused Condoleezza Rice and Dick Cheney to go on television and say the smoking gun will become a mushroom cloud. So just having that nuclear part of the whole deal was the slam dunk. That's what you could tell to the American people. The American people were not scared of chemical weapons or biological weapons of mass destruction. Americans are scared of the nuclear weapons. And that's why Condoleezza Rice went on TV with this stuff about the smoking gun is going to become a mushroom cloud. That scared the hell out of Americans.
Right.
And that's what they could sell to the United States, that fear. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, yes. Appreciate it, Freedom.
Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our guest in the first hour is Joseph Cirincioni. He is the Senior Vice President for National Security and International Policy at the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C., and the author of a new book, Bomb Scare, The History and Future of Nuclear Weapons. It was published by Columbia University in the spring of 2007. Prior to joining the center in May of 2006, he served as the Director of Non-Proliferation at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace for 8 years. He is the co-author of Contain and Engage, a new strategy for resolving the Iran nuclear crisis. In May 2004, the National Journal listed Mr. Cirincioni as one of the 100 people whose ideas will shape the policies of the next administration. The World Affairs Council of America also named him one of 500 people whose views have the most influencing in shaping American foreign policy. Mr. Cirincioni worked for 9 years in the House of Representatives on the professional staff of the Committee on Armed Services and the Committee on Government Operations, and served as staff director of the Military Reform Caucus. He is the author of over 200 articles on defense issues, the producer of 2 DVDs on proliferation, is a frequent commentator on these issues in the mainstream media. He is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome to the program, sir. Do we have him on? We don't have him on yet? Okay. All right. We are trying to get hold of him. I wish when he walked in here, I wish if he would have told me that we don't have him on yet. That would have been nicer, guys, instead of me assuming that he was still on, that he was on. Okay, so we are waiting for Mr. Joseph Cirincioni. Is he, what are we getting on him? Can someone give me an update so I'll know what to do from here? Okay. They're calling him right now. Okay. So I guess we get to just sit here and relax until we get him on the line, on the phone. If we can't get hold of him, we have that cell number. So let's see if we can get hold of him on that, if we can't get hold of him on the landline. Okay. So while we are waiting for our guest, let's go ahead and go back to the subject of George Tenet. George Tenet, as most of you know, he was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. And he supposedly, we are spending billions of dollars on this agency to tell us what's going on in the outside world, besides other agencies. But he was at that time the director of the Central Intelligence Agencies. He was part of the group that very much worked up the plans and discussed plans to attack Iraq. Now, I understand, and back then we knew that he was at ease. I mean, this is to his credit. We knew back then, even when he was there from day one, that he was at ease with the vice president and even with other people in the administration, with Rumsfeld. And there was a confrontation between these people and George Tenet. But he should have said, he should have exposed the truth at the time when he was in the position of policy. He should not have waited until 2 years after he's out or 3 years after he's out of office to come out with a book and say this is what was going on. Imagine, ladies and gentlemen, if he would have, when the president had given him that Medal of Freedom in the East Room on July 14th, 2004, if he would have just taken that Medal of Freedom and handed it to the president and said, take this medal and you know what, while the cameras were rolling, he could have saved a lot of people. And if he would have, like I said earlier, if he would have just stood up, he probably would be running for president now if he would have stood up and said the truth and told the world the truth about what is going on. I believe we have Professor Cirincioni with us. Welcome to the show, sir.
I am very sorry to be late for the start of your show, but thank you very much for having me on.
That's no problem, sir. I'm glad you're here. Professor Cirincioni, am I saying the name right?
Well, there's lots of ways to say it. Cirincioni is usually how we say it in Italian. It's Cirincione.
You know, somebody told me that, and he's now watching, and he's going to say, you should have said it like I told you, because he taught me how to say it that way, the Italian way.
Well, he's very gracious and very sophisticated, but I usually say Cirincioni.
Very good. Sir, we want to talk about nuclear bombs. I know you wrote the book, The Bomb Scare, and I'm going to talk about other issues. But I wanted to see what is your take on George Tenet's book, just very quickly, briefly.
Well, George Tenet gives you about a quarter of the truth in that book. He gives you some insights into the intense politicalization of the intelligence process, but then basically avoids all responsibility for what went wrong. Seems to say that his quote slam dunk was not about how easy it was to make the case, how strong the evidence was about Saddam Hussein, but how easy it was going to be to convince the American people about the case. I don't know why he thinks that somehow gets him off the hook.
Isn't that even worse?
I think it might be. I mean, that whole episode, his whole discussion of that, shows what exactly was wrong, how he was viewing all this as a political issue, as a test of his loyalty to the president, instead of as an intelligence issue, a national security issue, and his loyalty to the Constitution. That's what basically went wrong in this process, and why so many good analysts were bludgeoned into agreeing to present a case that was patently false. We now know with absolute certainty, as Vice President Cheney likes to say, that there were no nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons in Iraq. There weren't any programs to build those weapons. There wasn't any intention of starting programs to build those weapons. This war was completely unnecessary, and there's a lot of responsibility on George Tenet's head.
Now, how did we get here, Professor? George Tenet is the director of the CIA. He's supposed to be the watch and eye for us, and now he is engaged in fooling the people. How did we get here, where the director of the CIA is actually engaging in fooling the people, and now they're trying to fool us again? How did we get here?
Yeah. We now know that there wasn't anything intrinsically wrong with the intelligence agencies or with most of the analysts. We have a very clear picture of how the agencies were pushed into taking these essentially political positions, and those who disagreed with the position were pushed aside, and those who produced the right intelligence were promoted and pushed to the floor. So, in some ways, the 9/11 Commission that recommended a dramatic overhaul of the intelligence agencies and the creation of a new Director for National Intelligence jumped the gun. They made their analysis before we had the full picture. There's still a lot more to come, and we'll be hearing, by the way, reports coming out of the Senate Intelligence Committee in the next few months that will go more into this process of the politicalization. But the basic answer to your question is not in the intelligence agencies. It's in the White House. And it's clear now, and George Tenet does speak to this in his book, Verifying What Others Have Said, that this administration came into power intending to go to war with Iraq, that this was at the top of their to-do list. And we also know that from Paul O'Neill, the former Secretary of the Treasury, a conservative Republican, the former president of Alcoa, who wrote in his book, The Price of Loyalty, that he was stunned to, at the very first National Security Council meeting in early 2001, January, I think it was, that the first order of business was Iraq. He was stunned by this, and we now know that this was the agenda of the administration all along, and they bent the facts to make their case. They used 9/11 to justify this war, and I have to say the president is still doing it. Just listen to his comments today, where he continues to talk about 9/11 and Al-Qaeda and terrorism as if that has anything to do with the war in Iraq. It wasn't why we went in. It isn't why we're there now. It's not why we have to stay. But he continues to make this case, and unfortunately, most of the media in America lets him get away with this. They just don't call him on this.
Okay. Let's jump into your area of, actually, I mean, you have a lot of areas of expertise, but this is one of them.
I spent a lot of time working on this Iraq WMD issue before the war, and I was against going to war, and over at the Carnegie Endowment with Jessica Matthews, we did an excellent series of studies showing that while there was concerns about the weapons, there was plenty of things we could do besides go to war. And in fact, the inspection process was working. And then after the war began, I scoured the evidence, and we did another study called WMD in Iraq that proved, even before the Senate and the other committees looked into this, that the case was always very weak, and that there was a politicalization process that went on. So I'm pretty deep into this Iraq issue. So I'm sorry to go on so long about it.
That's okay. Let me ask you a quick question about the Council on Foreign Relations. I have a bad taste in my mouth about this particular Council on Foreign Relations, which you are a member of. What is it exactly, and how do you influence policy through this Council on Foreign Relations?
A bad taste. I'd like to hear more about that. So, yeah, I'm a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I think there's about 3,000, maybe 3,500 members, and it is a bipartisan organization, or nonpartisan more precisely, Republicans and Democrats. It's currently run by former Republican officials. Richard Haas, who's the president, was the former director of policy under Colin Powell in the State Department, and the Washington Bureau was also headed by a Republican former official. But it tries to stay, in the middle. It tends, I think it leans to the right pretty consistently, in my view, and it didn't do a very good job before the Iraq War. I distinctly remember going to panels that were all about how we should invade Iraq, not whether we should invade Iraq. But what are your concerns about the Council?
Okay, let's jump to the issue at hand today. Nuclear bombs in the Middle East. I know you are an expert on that, and you wrote a book about it. Is there really a threat coming from Iran on this nuclear bomb issue?
Oh, there's definitely a threat. It's a question of how imminent a threat, how serious a threat. And what we can say with a high degree of certainty is that the threat from Iran is several years away. And then you get a little ambiguous, and it's not clear about how far. The best guess we have is 5 to 10 years away. That is, it would take Iran at least 5 and more likely 10 years to be able to create enough material for a nuclear bomb. But this is a threat, not because Iran would get a bomb and then give it to Al-Qaeda. That's highly unlikely. Or that they would use the bomb against Israel or the United States. Again, deterrence is alive and well. They know what would happen next. The real threat is what happens in the region. What does Saudi Arabia do? What does Egypt do? What does Turkey do? These are all countries that are rivals with Iran. They couldn't allow Iran to get the military, political, and diplomatic edge that they would get from having a nuclear bomb or having the capability to build one. They would feel tremendous pressure to match that, and in fact, we already see this happening. In the last 5 or 6 months, all of these countries have announced interest in nuclear power programs. Not bomb programs, but like Iran, they say they want to start nuclear power programs. Now, for countries like these, it's going to take at least 10, maybe more years to acquire this technology and develop this kind of capability. But what's significant is that they're signaling their intent and are actually taking some moves to start. And that's the threat, that you would turn the Middle East from a region that has 1 nuclear power, Israel, into one that has 4 or 5 nuclear powers with the unresolved political, economic, and territorial differences. That's a recipe for nuclear war.
Israel is in the region, and they have Mordechai Vanunu was on this show last year, who incidentally was convicted yesterday or the day before, and he said that Israel had, at the time when he was there, they had 200 nuclear bombs, and he estimated that they might have about 400 now. If you're saying 5, 6 years down the road, Iran would have 1, what difference does it make?
Well, our estimates of Israel's capabilities are based on how much material they could have produced over the last 40 years. And so when people give those estimates, they think there's enough material for that many bombs. But I don't think the media knows, and I certainly don't know, how many Israel's actually constructed. My guess is about 100. But let's say,
well, I mean, how many nuclear bombs is it going to take to destroy the Middle East?
Right. That's exactly right. If Iran has one, does Iran use that bomb? No, they don't. They're deterred by the conventional power of the U.S. and Israel alone, and then the nuclear deterrent adds to that. So it's not. What the other point that gets raised in this is it becomes very difficult to convince a Muslim state not to acquire nuclear weapons when the Jewish state has them, and when the U.S. has 10,000 of them. If it's okay for Israel, it's okay for the U.S. Why exactly isn't it okay for Iran? It becomes a very difficult case to argue, and one that seems inherently discriminatory to many people in the world.
Joe, you served as the director for non-proliferation at the Carnegie Endowment. I'm not really sure exactly what you all did there, but was there, did you study Israel and the bombs that they have, and they did not sign the non-proliferation? I mean, was there any discussions in the endowment, in Carnegie Endowment, about what Israel have?
Sure. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, it's got a long name, but it's a think tank. There's about 100 think tanks in Washington, and the Carnegie Endowment is one of the largest and oldest. And what we do is do research. And the whole idea is that it's nonpartisan, it's objective research, and we want to have the research then inform better government policies. So my job there was to direct all our research on nuclear proliferation, and I wrote a book called Deadly Arsenal, where we went country by country and examined each country's capability. There's 9 countries in the world, including North Korea, that have nuclear weapons. Israel's one of them, and so I wrote about that and analyzed that and tried to present that information to policymakers so they can improve their policies. So we had lots of discussion about Israel. In fact, I think it's later this week. I'm going to a session here in Washington at another think tank, the Henry L. Stimson Center, where I also used to work. We were going to hear from Ariel Levite. He's the deputy director of the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission, and we'll hear some of his views on the subject. They don't, of course, acknowledge having nuclear weapons, but they talk in general about the nuclear situation.
So, explain something to me, and I'm sure you've been asked this question a lot, especially from people in the Middle East. Why the United Nations Atomic or the International Atomic Agency, why they never pressured Israel to inspect their reactors?
Yeah. Well, Israel has never joined the International Non-Proliferation Treaty, so it's not required to put its the Mona reactor, which is what it has, which is where they produce the plutonium for their weapons. It was never required to put that under international inspection. And so, sort of technically, legally, that's their right. They don't have to join the treaty. India didn't join the treaty. They're not required to put their reactors under inspection. Pakistan didn't join. They're not required. Those are the only 3 countries that didn't join. But the broader question is still accurate. Why hasn't the U.S. and other countries done enough to pressure Israel to deal on nuclear issues in the Middle East? Israel's stated policy is that it wants a Middle East free of nuclear weapons, but neither the U.S. nor Israel has done much about that policy over the past at least 6 years, and in general it's been a low priority over the last 30 years.
Okay. Joe, what is Iran counting on? Because it's definitely standing up to the United States, knowing that they don't really have much of an air force or a navy or much of a force to defend their country. What are they counting on? Go ahead.
Well, they're counting on several things. First, they believe that Russia and China will stop the United Nations from passing any resolutions that would justify the use of military force. Now, they were very rudely surprised in December, and then again last month, when the Security Council, including Russia and China, passed resolutions imposing sanctions on India. They were not expecting that.
On Iran.
On Iran, yes, I'm sorry. And they were taken aback by that. And those, by the way, those sanctions are hurting Iran. They are suffering some real financial consequences from those sanctions, and there's been a political fallout. The second thing they're counting on, I think, is their deterrence. Even though they don't have a strong conventional military force, if the U.S. or Israel were to attack Iran, there are half a dozen what we call asymmetrical responses that they could have, with, say, unleashing the Shia militia in Iraq on U.S. troops in Iraq, enlisting Hezbollah to attack Israeli targets or possibly American targets. I think they're counting on the anger in the Muslim world at what would be the fourth attack on a Muslim state in the last 6 years: Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, and then Iran. That they're counting on that anger to rise up against U.S. interests worldwide. And then, of course, the threat of shutting down the Straits of Hormuz. About a quarter of the world's oil flows through the Straits of Hormuz. This is the narrow neck of the Persian or the Arabian Gulf, depending on your point of view, and it flows right past Iran's shoreline. They have enough forces, whether that's cruise missiles or men in rubber boats, that could hit some of those tankers and prevent anyone from going through those straits. That would send the price of oil zooming past $100 a barrel, probably $200 a barrel, according to some experts. And that would cause recessions in many Western, in fact, probably most of the global economies. That's what they're counting on. That's what they're counting on. And, by the way, for some in Iran, like I think Ahmadinejad, they almost would welcome the conflict. That would strengthen his hand. That would show that there's no dealing with the West, that his policies of confrontation are accurate, he would say. And it would probably end debate inside Iran about whether to pursue a nuclear weapons option. I think the hardliners would then consolidate their control, and it would be an all-out push to get a nuclear weapon as quickly as possible. So it's that set of factors, I think, that's going through the Iranian political elite at this point.
Okay. Now, for a long time, my opinion was, no, we will not attack Iran. But recently, I'm changing my mind, and I'm thinking, yeah, we might attack Iran. How possible or probable the United States would attack Iran?
Well, I feel like a Las Vegas bookmaker on this. I feel like the odds change every week on this. And if you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have said that it was almost certain that we were going to do it. I thought those were like a 70% chance. And even 3 or 4 months ago, I thought it was 50-50. I actually think it's a little less now, especially since the November 2006 elections turned the Congress over to the Democrats, and Secretary Rumsfeld was forced to resign, and we put more pragmatists, basically, in the administration, including at the head of the intelligence agencies and the Department of Defense. And I think the Joint Chiefs are strongly against any action on Iran. They got their hands full with Iraq. So and the president is so unpopular that it's very, very difficult for him to mobilize any kind of support for a war with Iran, as much as some people in the administration would like. I think Vice President Cheney would like to do this. I think it's possible that Elliot Abrams of the National Security Council would like to do this. I think there are people in the Vice President's office who think it's necessary to do this. I know the neoconservatives in the United States think it's necessary. All you have to do is read the Weekly Standard or read Max Boot in the Council on Foreign Relations, who rails on about the necessity of attacking Iran, or Charles Krauthammer, who writes in the Washington Post, or Josh Moravchik at the American Enterprise Institute. All these guys are calling for war with Iran. I just think that these neoconservatives have been so discredited that their advice is listened by fewer and fewer people. It's not no risk at this point, but I think it's very low. Very, very, that is 10%, 15% chance. But like I say, it changes week to week. And I do have friends who, like you in Washington, are actually very worried. And they feel that somehow the president is cornered that he might push for this action, or even that he just doesn't care about his popularity and he believes that he's on a mission from God and that this is his historic destiny. And I do hear those theories. So far, I don't see any actual movement in that direction. I think the arrows, thankfully, are going the other way.
Okay. In your contain and engage articles, and I believe there was a meeting that you actually, or a panel that you have moderated to speak on this, contain and engage, and some of the points that you're mentioning, of course, Henry Kissinger, probably he was at, with that understanding back in the 70s that we can deter, we don't need to go, that's exactly what he was doing with the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. Instead of confrontation, he, thought of engaging and deterring. But you mentioned that few things that we can do, few options that we can do with Iran. One of them is maintaining what we're doing now, and then non-military efforts to replace the current regime, military attacks on non-Iranian nuclear facilities, and a grand bargain. And the fifth one is decisive diplomacy to roll back Iran nuclear programs. I understand all of the, except the grand bargain. What can we bargain with Iran to stop their pursuing nuclear bomb?
Yeah. Well, what we tried to do in the report is examine all the options that people are considering for Iran, including a military attack or what some people call the grand bargain. And the grand bargain is very tempting and logical to a certain extent. And it basically says, let's put all the issues on the table. What we need is a brand new approach to Iran. The way Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger made a breakthrough with China in the 70s. Remember, China in the 1960s was very much like Iran now. We thought they were led by crazy, revolutionary expansionists, that they were pursuing nuclear weapons. China actually had the nuclear weapons. They were ideologically opposed to us. And then in 72, Richard Nixon just reversed course, made this dramatic trip to Beijing, and put all the issues on the table and fundamentally changed U.S.-China relations. And some people think that's what we need to do with Iran. And we have to have a resolution of the nuclear issue, the support for so-called terrorist groups, Hezbollah and Hamas, and the position on Israel and human rights in China. Let's solve all those, bundle them all together in a big package. I don't disagree with the logic of that approach. I disagree with its politics. I don't think either capital is ready for that. I don't think those in Tehran or in Washington are capable of executing this. And I think it's a mistake to hold the nuclear issue hostage to resolution of these other issues, as important as they are. Human rights in Iran is important. Support for Hezbollah and Hamas is important. But the nuclear issue is the most important, and I think it's possible to resolve that, at least temporarily, independent of the other issues. And that's why we call for what we call decisive diplomacy, a strategy to contain the Iranian nuclear program, but to engage the Iranian leadership and the Iranian people themselves. We think that has a much higher prospect of working to end this nuclear standoff.
Okay. Joe, I'm going to just kind of a little bit go away from the, or move away from the nuclear issue and go back to the war in Iraq. As George Tenet and others have said that everybody, actually I think it was Paul Wolfowitz who said that everybody in the administration agreed that the weapons of mass destruction was the one to go after and convince the American people with, and that they did. But all of them knew that there was nothing there. I mean, they could not have not known that really Saddam, after 12 years of sanctions and losing 500,000 children due to malnutrition and lack of medicine, so a country that could not even feed their own children was definitely not a threat to the United States. So we know that these people would have known at that time that this is just a bunch of BS, then why did we go and attack Iraq?
Well, I slightly disagree with you. Let me take this in steps. One, the administration is clearly being disingenuous. It's not telling the whole truth when they say that everybody thought Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. Because what that means is there are many people who believe that there were some weapons there. I thought there was a very good chance that there might be some chemical weapons there or some biological weapons, anthrax. We know that because he did have them in the 1991 war, and he couldn't account for the destruction of all of them. And what this was basically an accounting issue. There was a small percentage of these weapons that we knew he built, and he didn't have good enough records to show that he destroyed them. So the UN inspectors couldn't certify that everything was gone. So we thought there was something, but there was a big difference between being worried about him having some mustard gas and him having a nuclear weapon. And that's the administration's trick. Everybody didn't think he had nuclear weapons. Only the United States really thought that. And the administration used that as the fear factor, that we don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud. And they blurred the distinction between mustard gas and mushroom clouds. And that was really the big lie that got us into the war. But having said that, I believe that the administration officials did think there was something there. They sort of applied their own logic, what they call a mirror image. If I was Saddam, I would have had this. And that's why the U.S. troops, when they went in there, really had the gas masks and were afraid they was going to be attacked. The military commanders thought he had gas weapons, biological weapons, and they were very careful about this, and it showed in the operation. The other lie is that after we were then there for months and looked everywhere, and even a year later, that some people in the administration are still acting as if they must have been there, that we don't know.
Okay,
but the U.S. position is still no. We looked, there was nothing there. There wasn't a gram, there wasn't an isotope, there wasn't a microbe. There were no weapons.
But Joe, my question was, why did we go? Because a lot of countries have these biological, mustard gas and all this, anyone can have that. So, and of course, probably most countries in the world have it. But why did we go and attack Iraq? That was my question. What was the reason behind it?
It had nothing to do with his actual weapon. As Paul Wolfowitz said in his Vanity Fair article, that was the reason everyone could agree on. But for Paul Wolfowitz, for Richard Pearl, for Elliot Abrams, for Vice President Cheney, this wasn't about weapons. This was about the transformation of the Middle East. It was never supposed to stop with Iraq. Iraq was the first target in what people thought would be a series of regime change operations. 4 years ago, today, at this mission accomplished speech, there was a tremendous hubris and arrogance here in Washington. They thought that they had been vindicated, that we were going to run the table. The neoconservatives were saying things like, men go to Baghdad, real men go to Tehran. They were going to go to Damascus, and remember there was a lot of saber rattling over Damascus. They were going to go to Tehran to overthrow that regime. In fact, it was April 2003 where the Iranian government came to the United States with an offer to negotiate, to settle all these issues. There really was an attempt to make a grand bargain then. The Bush administration didn't even answer the letter on this. They didn't want to negotiate with this regime. They wanted to overthrow it. And that's what they thought they were going to do. They were going to use the U.S. military as a historic catalyst, as an agent of geopolitical transformation. They were going to resolve this issue of the Middle East once and for all by systematically overthrowing or pressuring or changing the regimes throughout the Middle East, including those of our allies, like Saudi Arabia and in Egypt. That was their grand vision. That's why we went in Iraq. Iraq was the first and easiest target.
Okay, but why did we want, number one, why did we want to transform the Middle East into a new Middle East? And second, you mentioned that Iraq was not supposed to be the only one. We're supposed to move to other countries. With what? We can't even handle Iraq. So, I mean, are our military guys and planners, are they that way off that, we can't even handle Iraq? So how were we supposed to move on to other countries?
Well, this is actually, you're getting at several very interesting issues, and one is that, the generals in our establishment have been let off the hook so far, and they have really failed America. Our generals, some of them knew better, and were silenced. Some of them knew better and acquiesced, and some of them didn't know better. But all in all, our generals never should have been so silent, so complacent in this, because it was the civilians who thought this was going to be so easy. Remember, General Cirincioni was fired, forced into retirement for saying that it was going to take 300,000 troops if we were going to go into Iraq. And they really thought that it was going to be quick, cheap, and easy. They really, really thought that. And 4 years ago, for a brief month or two, it looked like they were right. They thought this was going to be easy. They completely misunderstood the situation. And once again, underestimating the power of nationalism. So, America has a traditional problem with nationalism.
Okay, but why did we want to transform the Middle East to a new Middle East?
Yes, and this is what traditional in foreign policy, you see overlapping agendas. There's hardly ever one reason that makes a country do something like this. And there were multiple agendas here that overlapped. Some of the people were interested in protecting Israel. So we were going to go there to eliminate an arch foe of Israel, and then we roll on to Syria, and that would weaken the Palestinian Authority, and that would create a more compliant Palestinian group that would then be able to negotiate a peace deal with Israel on Israeli terms. There was clearly some who thought that. For others, this was all about China. This was all about a vision of what was going to happen in the 2030, 2040, when the U.S. was inevitably going to engage in the conflict with China. And Paul Wolfowitz wrote about this back in 1999 and in 2000. And what you had to do was secure American interests and resources in the Middle East. You had to sort of clean up that mess, and by the way, prevent China from getting the oil resources that it so desperately needs.
You're talking about the project for New American Century?
Project for New American Century. I mean, this is all openly discussed in the Project for the New American Century,
now,
and in various articles that these guys would write. And for some, it was all about breaking the Vietnam syndrome, to get Americans used to using military force, because their view of the world is that it's a Hobbesian jungle, it's dog eat dog, and that we couldn't be weak, and that this would be a demonstration of force that would intimidate our opponents and would convince other countries that they would counter U.S. interests only at their own peril, only the survival of their regime. So there were all these reasons. And I would say, and here's the part where I'm weakest. I don't really know what the oil agenda was. I know a lot of people think this is all about oil.
I don't either. I don't buy the oil thing at all.
Yeah, you can make money in oil lots of ways. You don't have to invade Iraq to make money on oil.
Right.
Nor do I think this was primarily military-industrial complex, although there was, that contributed to the desire to go to war. And once it started, the interest in contracts said the drive for war. But I think this was an ideological war. This was the neocons' war. And it's very rare in American history that you can see a small group dominating the process so much and have so much to do with such a dramatic turn in American history. I got to say, in Washington, people talk about this all the time. It's going to take us decades to recover from this. And it's really, really true. The damage this small group of people did, the damage President Bush did, is a turning point in American history. It's going to be decades before we fully recover from this tragic
Joe, very quickly, because we're running out of time here. There was another document called the Clean Break Strategy for Securing the Realm, and these same people who wrote the, at least some of them, who wrote the Project for New American Century and the Clean Break document, I see the same names there, and then most of these people turned out to be in policy positions with the Bush administration. Do you see any link in both of these documents and what we did in Iraq?
Oh, absolutely, and I've written about this, and I would encourage your viewers, your listeners, to go and just Google clean break and in quotes, and you will find this memo very quickly. It was written by David Wormser, who's the Middle East advisor for Vice President Cheney. Richard Pearl was involved in this. I think Douglas Feith was involved in this as well. And there's nothing. This isn't a conspiracy. This isn't a Zionist coup. These were patriotic Americans who were trying to give advice to the newly elected Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu, and they were trying to convince him to invade Iraq. You know, Netanyahu didn't want anything to do with this. He never took his advice, but they found a much more gullible leader when President Bush was elected, and they peddled the same nonsense, and this time they found a leader who bought it.
Okay. Joe, we're going to go to the phones very quickly. We only have time for one call. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi. I would like to respond to his inquiry as to why you find the Council on Foreign Relations a pernicious institution.
Very quickly. We're running out of time. Go ahead.
It was an unelected body that was established by Zionist bankers who sought a world government to be run by them, and these same bankers were bankers who profiteered from the First World War and have continually had an incentive to bring the United States into unnecessary wars ever since.
Okay. Joe?
Gee, if anything, I would say the problem with the Council on Foreign Relations is it doesn't have enough influence. I actually don't think the Council's been very influential over the past few years. If anything, it's been more of a, maybe a cheerleader or a sounding board for the government. It hasn't really produced many policies. But let me say more positively, it does have a number of reports that are issued that are quite balanced on all sides. Take a look at the new report on China, which just came out, which is a very balanced engagement strategy for China, and is a real counter to this kind of hysterical view you see of China as a threat, or China as the new enemy, or China as a rising military power. The two people who did this, Carla Hill, former trade representative of the United States, and Admiral Blair, former head of the Pacific Command, are very sober, moderate individuals. So I have to disagree with you, Carla, on that one.
Okay. Very good. Joe, I only have time. We're completely out of time, so I just wanted to say thank you for coming on the program. It has been a real honor to have you on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Once again, I apologize for being so late.
No problem. Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we only have about a minute left in the program. Very interesting program with Joe, Joseph Cirincioni. I would like, if we have time left, to put his website on. I don't know if we did that during the show or not. I did not notice. But if we do, if we can very much, quickly put it on. Excellent speaker, and I really, I always thought everybody with the Council on Foreign Relations were bad guys, but I think Joe is, he's not too bad. And I was surprised to hear him speaking. And he said there was like 3,500 people in that council. So, but, one thing though, the majority on that council are basically people who may prescribe to the neocons' agenda. Let me put it that way. Apparently not everybody on that council is, but I think, let's say, the most influential ones are. I hope to bring Joe back so we can talk to him, and I appreciate the call, Chris. Thanks for the call. Ladies and gentlemen, we only have a little bit of time to say we will be back in about 4 minutes with Dalia Wasfi, MD. She's going to talk to us about Iraq. We will see you in a little bit.
Program I've never heard